Alright, we are back with another chapter reaction, this time to the long-awaited chapter 11010 doesn't flow as well.
11010, bro.
So it's gonna be...
It's 1110. It's 1110, not 11010.
11010 is just too funny. But it was well worth the wait. We had to wait for an English translation a couple extra days than we expected, but I'm not disappointed.
They lived up to the hype.
Yeah, I didn't.
Absolutely lived up to the hype.
And so instead of using our usual game board format that we've kind of been flowing with so far for chapter reactions, we're gonna kind of center in on what's now just the solo battlefield and take you page by page through the chapter, through what are some of the most monumental moments of any recent chapter I can imagine.
I mean, probably ever. There was so many double pages and just art. There wasn't even that much exposition. It was just art. Just seeing it for the first time and really getting to absorb it all.
Yeah, the first time in 9 years of publication of this manga, we went through the entirety of Wano without a single double spread. But this chapter needed to have it. And so let's jump right into it. But first, we have to cover what's going to be the new cover series, and it's obviously seeming like it's going to follow Yamato and Momonosuke. They're talking about how they want to travel throughout Wano, more Yamato kind of trying to recreate Odin's own journey, but realistically Wano's not that big. So I can't imagine it's going to take that long, and it's very quickly going to shift to something like either a Blackbeard invasion or Yamato and Momonosuke deciding when are we going to rejoin this fight.
I also think it'd be interesting if they discovered the underwater kingdom.
That could be really sick, especially with how much stuff is probably undiscovered down there, and Pluton. If they had a Pluton in the cover series, that would be insane.
And speaking of ancient weapons, let's talk about some ancient power, because page 1, we got the Black Lightning coming down the same exact way that it did with Saturn. And we've got everyone else around just in awe, caught off guard. We've got Atlas jaw dropping to the floor again.
Even Bluegrass, who's seen plenty of things in her lifetime, just had to stop for a moment and look at what is occurring, and that is what you call an impressive entrance.
And honestly, she looks terrified.
I'd be terrified.
Yeah.
You already saw it happen once, and once it happened once, they set everyone off the island.
Yeah, now you're seeing 4 more at the same time. Yeah, I think she's starting to realize, like, maybe I'm not on the right side.
Maybe I'm not
here.
gonna chase Bonnie, I'm just gonna go away.
Operation GTFO.
And on the other side of that, the Giants, moving into page 2, continued to march right into the heart of this, despite what they might be seeing. They're just trotting along on their path.
They're so real for that. I love that. And that speaks volumes to them showing up, and then just how much they really are dedicated to fighting for the Sun God.
And just how notorious they are.
Oh, yeah, they're crazy.
They had their own bounty and their own legend that's lasted this long, so world powers are not, they are not
Dorian Bragi went 100 years. They're not going to stop now for some storms in the sky.
And taking us to the other side of the world once again, taking us back to Marie-Joie, into the Room of Authority, but in a state we've never really seen it before, because for the first time ever, it's empty.
Listen, there was a ton of cool panels throughout this. That one had just eerie vibes. You knew immediately, this is important. This is a big moment, because we've seen that room so many times, but never like that. And the way that the Vegapunks in the recording are talking so casually and lightheartedly, yeah, we got some time still. This is a huge deal. And then we see them whoosh, down to earth.
It's an interesting juxtaposition for sure, because he's like, hey, I got instant coffee, guys. I made instant coffee. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, we still got 7 minutes.
Yeah, alright. But you're right, the eerie vibe of that empty room where these people we've hardly even gotten a chance to see leave this room, it's just the essence of that emptiness speaks volumes. And instead, we get to meet who they really are on the next page, as we get to go through each of the Gorosei and learn a bit more about the yokai that connects to each of them. It's something that's been speculated and a bit more revealed through Saturn's true form, but now that we know the truth, each one of them has their own interesting naming scheme, and interestingly enough, none of them are like the typical no-me naming structure for devil fruits or like a clay man or anything like that. They are referred to as the blank for yokai.
Right, this is clearly something different. They aren't just one of something, they are the one. They all represent something very, very serious and very rooted in not just even history, but the root of everything to the world.
They all, interestingly enough, do have their own kanji too. It goes through, it's the Pakotsu, these powerful figures, but you do have the sandworm that stands out a bit, and some people might clown on it for that because it's just not as, I guess, imposing off the bat compared to some of the others.
It's big, hairy, and pink!
It's the Alaskan bullworm! It's still intimidating in its own right, regardless, and we get to just kind of see exactly what it seems like Oda's been planning in his mind for this for maybe those 9 years. Maybe he's been holding it in his pocket for this whole time, but that first double-page spread we get since Dressrosa 9 years ago.
Whew. That hit. That was so cold.
Not only one of just the most impressive pieces of artwork that we've seen come out of the series in a long time, but
ton of detail.
So many details, so much serious presence, and so much exposition about each of the characters without even really having to say that
Not
much.
a word other than the 5 Elder Planets.
That powerful title. And of course Luffy just standing in front of them. Tiny as can be, with his slight glow around him in the face of what's only reminiscent of things like the God's Hand from Berserk, these divine forces of evil. It's honestly just impressive, and it's hard to pick a favorite.
Man, if I had to though, it wouldn't be that hard. Venus Juro, just insane design, and immediately goes to work. Before anyone else has even blinked, he's halfway across the island just taking out pacifistas.
He's definitely got the most from this chapter in terms of not only screen time, as he shows up over and over again, gets his near own double panel for one of his attacks.
Yeah,
but
came out the gate flying.
even in Mars' panel, you can see a tiny bit of him on the background. He's just everywhere. If I had to pick a favorite, though, I would say Itsumade. It just stands out. Obviously, such a huge, imposing force compared to even the others, but...
No, they definitely were the two to get the most immediate shine when they took their place on the island.
And justifiably so, as they made their impact felt pretty immediately. With Venus Juro pretty much immediately commanding the presence of page 5 and 6, as he demonstrates an insane ability to not only pinpoint exactly who he needs to go after, but to get there nearly instantly before anyone watching and fighting these things can even notice.
No, and I know both of us immediately saw the resemblance between the way he moves with like the fastest lightning, but also the ice quality to his movement and attack with Brook and his undead abilities.
And it's worthwhile to mention, considering he is that undead horse yokai, it's very reminiscent of another soul that seemingly is stuck in the living world when it obviously belongs somewhere else, just like Brook.
And he seemed to have more control over being between those two worlds, because we saw him basically a centaur, half horse, half man, while he was cutting some of the pacifista.
Yeah, so we weren't totally inaccurate in our prediction of his humanoid figure, but definitely did not see the Bakotsu coming in terms of the yokai form he was.
We got the top half.
We got the half point. But moving on from that, I mean, you talked exactly about it, those similar ice powers to Brook, and interestingly enough, Brook does mention a lot of those ice powers he harnesses from the tether, keeping him in the living world from the underworld. So if he is the yokai, and often those are very deeply magical creatures tied in, perhaps it's even a King of Hell sort of connection where he's mastered that ability.
Right, I mean, they all seem to have that, the way they could come from Marishawa and just pop up on the island, with the quote-unquote summoning, is they seem to have that tie to each other and tie between their like underworld and like the ability to just travel between spaces like that.
As well as the Seance Circle that Brooke went into after the time skip. It's just adds
too many parallels for it to just be coincidence, by far.
As well as on page 7, we also see the rest of the Straw Cat crew who is kind of just trying to get out of here, as well as Sanji's warning him that there's just a god monster coming your way. You need to run. You need to get out of here. Like, we'll be fine. But I don't know what that thing is, and it's throwing itself up in the sky, so you gotta go. And it's pretty good advice from Sanji.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Don't worry about anything else, just get out of here. Satan is in the sky.
We don't know what it is, but it flies, and it's not just a single bird. It's some kind of creature. And on to the next page, in page 8, you see exactly what his plan is. He's just gonna pretty much berate the lava phase dome until he gets through, which we see Luffy, we've seen Kizaru, we've seen Bonnie get kicked through this thing. I'm impressed it held just once, but it's only a matter of time before he manages to get through it. And when he does, then we're just adding on to the parallels we had from our comparison to Dressrosa.
Exactly. Got the birdcage all over again. Then you got Venus Juro still continuing to get a lot of focus as he continues taking out Pacifista. Sandworm Jupiter also starts to begin his attack. Everything's just going crazy all at once, and it really just keeps the one-upping of every chapter that we've seen recently, where things just are escalating at such a quick pace.
And despite all of that, amidst all the chaos, Luffy's minimal reactions we get throughout the entire thing, like shown on page 9, he's shocked, obviously, and he's kind of more upset than anything that he's like, wow, there's 5 of you? This isn't fair. I was having like a one-on-one, this was getting fun. But he actually surprisingly identifies what Jupiter's doing correctly, calling him a worm instead of any of the nicknames or incorrect things he's clearly done throughout the series.
And like maybe it's something that as a little kid, maybe he was told stories about a sandworm from like, you know, Dodon or one of the other bandits that he grew up with. And so he just has that mental image and can immediately identify, but who knows? Because yeah, it is interesting that he was able to just, with all that's happening around, be like, hey, that's a sandworm.
Or all the things that dig. I mean, they fought a mole woman who digs holes into the ground too. So it's like interesting.
He just kind of has the parallels in his brain where he can make sense of what he's seeing with the sandworm, with the burrowing in the ground.
It could definitely be an instance where like those good instincts he has is just kind of taking over the moment. However, we see some good instincts all across the crew, as once we go back again to Usopp and the rest of the crew, he gets kind of his own mini win, which is good to see him finally taking command in one of these arcs post-time skip, as in Wano he really didn't get to shine that much.
Yeah, and we've always known Usopp's a really smart guy, and it's great to see him. And honestly, Lilith shows respect to him for that too, that he's the one who deserves the credit for stopping the ship. It was his quick wits that were able to save Brook just kind of being a reckless idiot in that sense.
It's also interesting to note that he used his bamboo shoot pop greens to stop the ship, which is impressive for the strength of those pop greens to withstand such a ship like the Sunny made of the atom wood to just crash into it anyway. But also there's a small note that you can see that his pop greens actually work on island cloud material as well, which is not something we've ever seen before in the series.
Right, and that could speak to, you know, the island that he got it on was very exotic and had a lot of unknown features to it. That could actually maybe even have a tie to some of the ancient environments and abilities that the rest of the world doesn't have around anymore.
And I'm glad for him, because he's told us he had to step up because his masters are on the island, and he's finally doing so. So hopefully we get to continue see him doing that throughout the rest of these chapters on Egghead. However, somebody who's kind of been slacking in a certain regard in terms of helping other people throughout this chaos is Zoro, and that's finally who we get to check on next. And on page 10, we get to finally see more of the Zoro and Lucci matchup. And thankfully, we also see a conclusion to it.
Yeah, because, I mean, Jinbei was another person who was very on top of what was happening, realized this was a dire situation and we need to go now. And so he hops on the phone with Sanji, and Sanji even says, he's being inconsiderate. He's putting others in danger with his own, I don't know if I'd call this hubris, but just, focusing too much on the battle instead of the war. And the moment he calls him a burden, that snaps to Zoro. That gets his attention. Which, honestly, kudos to Sanji. He knew he needed that little kick to really get into gear.
They're the two that definitely push each other in a way that's a little different from each other. It seems like they're butting heads a lot of the times, but it's kind of what they need. And one thing I didn't notice at first, because the first time I saw those panels, as soon as he says, oh, he's being such a burden, you're right. You see his reaction cue, and then you get a solo panel beneath it where he's sulking like he does.
He's mad.
And at first I thought he was able to hear this across the island, although, like you had mentioned, the comms between Sanji and Jinbei, he was able to pick up on it from that distance, which is still impressive.
Yeah.
But it may be also referencing just more and more his enhanced observation he's been working on. And he also somewhat adds a new attack to the arsenal. It's somewhat of a split of his tiger hunt that he's used in the past, but more of kind of a throwback in the face of the Lucci attack.
I was going to say, a little bit of just a flex on Lucci.
Calling it the Spotted Leopard Hahava Hunt, which is also just a sick name, bringing in reference, as they put in the note at the end of the chapter, being the coldest level of hell in Buddhism, just spreading his own lore as the self-proclaimed king of hell. And you gotta love it for him, because it's a beautiful thing to see.
Gotta earn that title, then you gotta maintain it.
And moving back to the conclusion of our chapter, which seems like it's just been a roller coaster so far, and it's gone so fast with all the double spreads and everything we have. We end up on another giant spread where Luffy is swallowed up by Jupiter. Similar to, we had to put together a list for how many times Luffy's been swallowed, so let's go through it. The Brachiosaurus on Little Garden, Kaido in dragon form, and now the sandworm on Egghead.
And the serpent in Skypiea.
Exactly. He just loves being swallowed. No pause.
Yeah, sure. But similar to how each of those beasts were slain, he once again gets freed by, this time, the attack of Dorian Bragi, with a very interestingly named attack, the Child of the Sawning Sun. Which, honestly, that's just an homage to him being the sun god. That's, it's dedicated to him.
They even say so as they're running up towards him, like, the belly of this beast in the darkness is no place for the sun god. He needs to have his light out and exposed. So let's saw our way through him. And you're right, he has a habit. I mean, granted, the serpent in Skypiea was electrocuted, but the one in the flashback was cut down by Nolan. So the serpents, anything that ends up swallowing Luffy, maybe sans Kaido, because he just gets thrown at a volcano.
And in true Sun God form, and Joy Wife form, of course they're laughing the entire way through. This is just funny to them. This is an honor for them to save him, because that's no place for him in the dark. He belongs in the light.
And they're just happy to see him again. They're like, oh, how you doing? It's been a while. It's nice to catch up. We couldn't stay away.
The waiting was becoming unbearable. I love that.
We couldn't stay away, man. Just after all of that, it's a lot to unpack for one, like we said, that doesn't have a ton of dialogue in it, but one that's very rich in what it tells you.
A lot happened. A lot went down.
And because the Gorosei themselves have so much to unpack, we are going to do a separate video about them doing a bit more of an in-depth dive into their yokai forms, whatever history and lore might be associated with them, and then how that might impact the future of their role in the story. But we're gonna save that for that video. So instead, let's key on some particular observations we made throughout the chapter that we thought would be particular interest to share.
Yeah, so for starters, the image of the empty room of the Authority is just such an intriguing concept. Because there's still the focus on the Denden Mushi that they were using before transporting. So perhaps Imu will enter the room to keep an eye on them and just see what is being unleashed onto the world, or even keep tabs on them and see if any of them possibly let him down. But again, like, the amount of times we've seen this room, it's always been with all of them in it. And this is just a complete switch up from anything we've ever seen before, and has such a dark tone to it, while the Vegapunks are in the background having such a light conversation.
If he were to observe the whole situation from that room, it would definitely be very similar again to like the underworld bosses watching Caesar broadcast, but perhaps it's also just kind of an homage to the concept that it's been a big deal for anyone to enter the room of authority beforehand. Now that they're actually leaving that room, it's an even bigger deal because that's like a power vacuum at the top, and if they're all gone and something happens, that could be an even bigger deal for the world.
They said it themselves, the balance can't be maintained forever.
And let's jump from there into our second observation, something a little bit more loose speculation, but very interesting to draw on. As we mentioned before, this was the first double-page spread we've had in 9 years since Dressrosa, and that double-page spread is the formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. So perhaps, and that's just perhaps, they could be alluding to the necessity for the assistance of the fleet sometime near soon. We've seen them watching the broadcast, so they're obviously nowhere near close right now, but it could be saying that they're coming about in the near future.
Right. And from a broader scale, the way the Gorosei are for Emu is very similar to what the Grand Fleet kind of is for Luffy, where they're representative of the power and what he represents, and they are people out in the world affecting change in his name.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. And speaking of comparisons, that leads us right into our third observation, because we had mentioned Nosturo's attack and his connections to Brook before, but we really wanted to kind of key in on that connection to his Soul Solid attack, where he does freeze his opponents.
Yeah, because the Marines literally described it the way it was described to the Marines was that the neural circuitry had been frozen temporarily to all the pacifista. And as you mentioned, Brook has explained that his ability to freeze using Soul Solid is harnessing the energy that keeps his soul in the living world from running off into the underworld. So there's already a very close comparison that Venus Juro could have some ties to the whole King of Hell, along with him already being a swordsman, just really sets him up as a likely counterpart to Zoro.
Not just a swordsman, because as we can see in this chapter, and I will say this with the biggest grain of salt because it could clearly just be an armament hockey they're infusing in the sword, but that looks like a black blade. That is a pretty black blade. It is one of the darker shades we have seen, only close to Yoru, and we'll obviously have to see it animated to tell for sure, but that attack where he is slicing through it and he gets his own focus looks like a black blade to me, and that is the second in the entire, or third, because only Ryuma and Mihawk have had it so far, so that's a very elite company to put that in immediately. And by setting him up even more, it's going to have to set up who's going to be his likely eventual opponent, Zoro, even more as well, which takes us into observation 4. That one small moment of Zoro's keenly hearing Sanji over the comms, just to hear him talking trash specifically, of course, but could be a kind of joke that leads into a bit more of his development in the near future, as he's lacked in observation hockey for a while, and it seems like a lot of his opponents in the near future are going to require a much higher level than what he has.
Right, because along with him being able to track someone as fast as Noshiro, it also is worth speculating how it could impact his eventual fight with someone like the Invisible Man Shiryu on the Blackbeard Pirates team. And so he has to still develop himself more beyond, obviously, the power that he's already got. He needs to be able to fight people who don't play by typical swordsman rules.
And that's what he had to learn and do against King and other fights in the past. But those kinds of fights are exactly what's going to prepare him for trying to take the top title in the world. If you think he's ready right now, I don't think he is myself.
Well, because you think Mihawk's only fought other swordsmen? No. He's had to adapt his fighting to be able to fight anyone as well. So it's the same for Zoro. He has to be able to truly take on any opponent before he can ever think about calling himself the best.
Absolutely. And that sets up our final observation for the chapter, being just Dory and Bragi reappearing once again and re-encountering Luffy in this particular manner I just thought it was very interesting, and I noticed it, a few other fans pointing it out as well, but that one time in which the Brachiosaurus does swallow Luffy, as he meets Dory for the first time, just a very similar imagery in terms of he's being swallowed and sliding down the neck, and then this blade, and this time the sawing sun, free him from that, just to see these giant happy faces, to see him once again. And it's very interesting just to see how those things have drawn a full circle, thousands of chapters later, essentially, and to see how it's come to mean a whole different thing at this point.
Right, and it carries so much more weight now because of, one, who he is, but also who the being that has swallowed him is as well.
Absolutely, and in a very offshoot thing I noticed as well, just because I was rereading a little of Little Garden to look up for this, but you see the volcano erupting at the start of every one of Dory and Broggy's duels, and interestingly enough, the last volcano we did see erupt was when Big Mom and Kaido were thrown in the volcano. So, although it's not really bringing them to fight one another, perhaps that is what brought them into the fight this time as well, as a sort of homage that we weren't really expecting because we had no anticipation of seeing these characters again soon.
Yeah, and it could just be nature reacting to the world changing, you know? It could just be a sign of something monumental is happening that even the Earth knows.
Well, we're just gonna have to keep waiting to see how the world reacts, because it's definitely going to shake from the Egghead incident as we are learning more and more just how large the scale of this chaos is.
At this point, it knows no bounds. I have no idea where this is going next, and I love that.
I can't agree more. Anything that will come our way, I'm sure we're gonna love, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you guys let us know what was your biggest standout moment from this chapter, because there were just so many insane moments to call from. And make sure you like the video if you enjoyed, and of course, as always, be crew.